This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by Prize Picks. Coming at you Wednesday morning, it's April 17th. We've got Britt Robson on today's show to continue digging into this Wolves Suns playoff series and also to take some time, which I think is worthwhile, to reflect on the regular season sort of before it becomes a distant memory here. But before we get rolling, right off the top, I wanted to bring up that myself and Britt Robson and Kyle Teige will all be at Falling Knife Brewing Company this Friday for a live show. We'll be there for like a happy hour from 6 to 7, kind of setting up the mics and all that stuff. Would welcome as many of you as possible to come through, say hello, get a seat. And then at 7 p.m., we will do the live show. Maybe I'm going to go about an hour, maybe a little bit over that as we take listener questions there. So maybe 7 to 8:15. I think it should be fun to gather a bunch of people together and also to show everybody Falling Knife, longtime sponsor of the pod. And they're also a big place to go watch the games in the playoffs, or they were last season. We want to kind of give everyone a taste of that with the live show, because on Saturday, we do now know the time. The Wolves play game 1 at 2:30 at Target Center on Saturday. If you're not going to that game, Falling Knife is a great place to do it, not just in the tap room, but they have this big TV truck trailer thing that can go out in the patio space there. So a lot of people were outside watching the game on either side of the trailer. You can bring a folding chair if you want to sit out there. It's kind of like a hill and everything. But that will be the place to be watching the Wolves bar in Minneapolis. But anyways, just wanted to throw that all on everyone's radar before we get to this weekend. Again, happy hour 6 to 7 on Friday, live show 7 to 8 p.m. And then Saturday afternoon for the actual game at 2:30 p.m. Go to all of it, go to some of it, whatever works for you. Again, that's Falling Knife Brewing Company, which is located right off of Broadway in Northeast Minneapolis. But before we do all that, we got this pod to do. Britt, how are you? How you doing?
I'm well, thanks.
You wrote a column for today that kind of surprised me. I was like, oh yeah, we should remember the regular season. It wasn't a Suns Wolves. You zagged. You did a recap of the season a little bit more so than a preview for the Suns Wolves series. And you did it in an interesting way by going back and trying to look at the 4 questions you had going into the season. I'm just going to read them here quickly. How effectively can Rudy Gobert alter or reconcile his career-long habits to fit the needs of this team? That was a question you had before the season. Will Ant's next leap include upgrading some of the subtle but damaging flaws in his game? The third one was, can Chris Finch wring optimal value out of a suddenly overcrowded front court? And then 4 was, can the Wolves reasonably rely on a full season of health from grizzled point guard Mike Conley? And as I'm reading that yesterday, I'm like, these are good questions for this series too. So I'd like to kind of marry those 2 things up here by reflecting on what guys like Rudy and Mike and whoever did during the season to answer some of the questions that they had, but also those questions kind of need an answering again in the playoffs. We can start with the Rudy one, or is there one of those 4 that you particularly like to dig into?
No, I think the Rudy one would be fine to start. And I guess the reason I did that is because, in addition to the fact that I like to zag when everybody's zigging, and there's going to be a million, and I'm going to have one in 48 hours. I'll have a Wolves Suns preview in Min Post, the second column of the week on Friday. But this was a 56-win regular season, and to throw that out like, oh, let's all obsess on the first round series with the Suns, which there's time and space. We're going to be doing nothing but that for the next 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, hopefully, if it's a long, fun series. But throwing 6 months of really, really satisfying, enjoyable basketball into the side bin. I just thought that a lot of the stuff that happened this year should be savored. I've covered this team since year 2 on a regular basis, went to a bunch of games in year 1. And this is, it's in the top 2 without question. I mean, already, if they get swept, they will be the second best season anyway, because no team has won more than 56 games. And the only team that has gone beyond the first round in franchise history is that team that won more than 56 games. So why not take a look at that and just relish what you saw? And I agree with you that all those questions become relevant for the series because they tie into what the Wolves did successfully adjust to. And now we are going to see, if not some adjustments, I see it more as like getting back to basic principles, quite frankly. I think there doesn't need to be a baby with a bathwater change. I just think there needs to be, surprise, surprise, some goddamn focus in the first quarter would be nice. Be mentally ready to step on the court for a change, which this team hasn't done in like weeks.
Yeah.
And having guys like Rudy Gobert rely on what he can do, and rely on what Mike Conley can do, and have Ant mind the things that the I's that need to be dotted, the T's that need to be crossed, that become big deals when you have 3 gunners out there who, if you give them a sliver, will hit a shot in your face. All those things are relevant. And Chris Finch, obviously, how he handles Naz Reid and Slow-Mo in tandem with Cat and Rudy and Jaden McDaniels, how all those minutes play out, all that is relevant. So with that huge preamble, what I would say about Rudy is that Rudy handled his matchup. Nurkic looked like a toy most of the time. Gobert has that matchup. So what you're doing is, what is Gobert going to be able to do to help other people in this series? And that involves how you want to play. Do you want to play a high wall, or whatever you want to call it on this team? Do you want to be up at the level? If so, how much do you want to drop? How quickly? Where should the rotations go? And a lot of that will have to do with Gobert's ability to simultaneously protect the rim and cheat enough to create some neverminds, to create some guys coming in and knowing they have to get off the ball, or that they have to stop and pause, which gives everybody else time to get up. So, yeah, I think that Rudy is obviously always going to be the linchpin of a defense for the Wolves that is challenged in some way. And I have confidence that Finch and Gobert and the rest of the team, given a week to think about it, should have some answers when they tip off on Saturday.
To the Nurkic point, Nurkic and the coverage point stand out there. Kyle and I kind of disagreed on this when we were doing it after one of the Phoenix games. I was kind of concerned that Nurkic would be a one-on-one force against Gobert before that first game, and he wasn't. Where he's really hurt the Wolves is as a passer in these last 2 games against them, and I think Rudy treated him like a toy is a little bit too much there. I mean, Nurkic was a plus 27 in that game on Sunday, and Gobert had a really good game, particularly a really good third quarter. He had 15 points in the third quarter, including 3 and 1s. Those all came against Drew Eubanks and Thad Young after Nurkic did what he does.
Nurkic in foul trouble, right?
Exactly. Yeah, Nurkic had been in foul trouble.
I would argue that, actually kind of reinforce, where Nurkic was effective was being in the dunker spot on that left block and waiting for everybody to forget about him. And then when they did rush toward him, being able to make that pass you mentioned.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a smart player, and he is outmatched when it comes to, I've actually been surprised. In international play, especially this summer, Nurkic did very well with Gobert. But I have seen
that's because he had Luka Garza space in the floor in the corner. Shout out Bosnia Herzegovina.
Well, Anyway, what I would say is that Nurkic's ability to foster further momentum on the offense, if that becomes important, the Wolves are doing their work.
Yeah, well, to the coverage point, you're right. The dunker spot, he's a force because he is a big body. He's going to get on the offensive glass. He might hurt the non-Rudy minutes just because he's big. He's a big offensive rebounder. He's forceful if he's down there. I really think about the place where Nurkic sort of tangentially can hurt the Wolves is at the top of the key, which is weird because he's not a shooter. But given that when he's up there and his ability to use that body to kind of give dribble handoffs, it forces Rudy to be up, not even in coverage. It forces him to be up just in his matchup because if Beal, Booker, or Durant come up and it's a little dribble handoff right there, some sort of get action, pick and roll type thing, Rudy can't be back in the lane. He can't be there because those guys are going to come off and just, shoot that right there. But I think to what some people, might not know if you haven't watched much of the Wolves this season is Rudy has very much varied his levels with which he covers the floor in coverage and in matchups. He's often played up at the level this season. He's actually just done it whenever they've played against a team that has a player like Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, or Kevin Durant. So we've seen that. Now, the thing to me is not that Rudy can't do that. It's that if Rudy is up there, he's not back at the rim. And the teeth of this Wolves defense has been, their ability to pursue on the perimeter and push things into Rudy there. If you're Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and whatever on the perimeter, you need to kind of be aware of where Nurkic is, because that's going to determine how much help you have from Gobert on the backside there. But kind of to the question of how effectively can Rudy Gobert alter or reconcile his career-long habits to fit the needs of his new team? He's done that this season. He came. That's I think probably the biggest reason the Wolves won 56 games this season is he let go of needing to play the Utah way, as you wrote, and embracing more of the way that Chris Finch wanted to play, because Chris Finch felt this roster had to play that way. There's still a conservatism to it, but Rudy's style with which he defends has been more varied than it ever has been in his career.
Absolutely.
And he's going to win Defensive Player of the Year. So there's probably some misnomers out there that he just can't do that. He did it at least during the regular season all year.
I think there is a fascinating debate, we're not going to have it today, about who is the most valuable player on the Timberwolves this season. Anthony Edwards is a legit one of the 3 All-NBA teams. And Rudy Gobert, you have to make a much stronger argument to include him on the 3rd NBA team, All-NBA team. But given that the team's identity is defense, and given that Gobert's added flexibility has unlocked this defense, and given the constancy of his effort, I mean, what has been incredible, the biggest argument for Gobert over Ant as the team MVP is constancy of effort, is being able to rely on the fact that Rudy Gobert will do his job. Ant still has gaps where he does not do his job. And, we can have this debate over and over again.
Oh, we're going to get to it in the Ant section.
Yeah. But I would say that what I know about Rudy Gobert against the Phoenix Suns is, barring foul trouble, which is always a bad specter, he will take care of interior scoring very well, provided that the Wolves figure out how they want to negotiate high pick and rolls and how they want to handle screens and all this other stuff that they've weirdly seemed at sea about the other day.
Yeah. Well, and this, whether it's to the MVP point or just in general to the Rudy impact point, as you wrote in your piece, the Wolves held opponents to 2.2 fewer points per 100 possessions than the second best defensive team in the NBA this season. And to contextualize that, if you add 2.2 points per 100 possessions to the second best defense, you drop down to 10th. And again, I'm stealing your stats here, but if you add 2.2 points per 100 possessions to the 10th place team, you move down to 19th. They were, with a bullet, the number one team, and with significant separation, that team defensively. And it was because of the constancy of Rudy's effort on the defensive end. And they just started trusting him. Right. I mean, that
and vice versa. Right.
Right. You're right. To put that both ways, that has worked, and that trust transcends to the offensive side of the floor. And I think it's a good thing when they are watching a lot of bad film this week, right? Because it's a lot of bad film on the 3 games against Phoenix.
Yep.
There's some good Gobert film on the offensive side of the floor in these matchups against Phoenix. And it's important that the Wolves continue to hold that trust in Rudy. And I think at least the film shows that trust is warranted. I don't know. Obviously, there's a big referendum sort of potentially come in on Rudy, and does his stuff work in the playoffs and all that. And he has something to prove. I kind of talked about it in that Players Tribune article, which was excellent, that I would, push everyone to go check out. But I feel surprisingly good about his ability to prove that, even in this matchup. Like, I see a world where the Wolves win this series and he's the reason why. And I see a world where the Wolves lose this series and he's had a good series,
Right.
And that is because of the adjustments that we've seen over the course of this season that he's made in his game, and the Wolves have sort of adapted around him.
I agree with that. I agree that what we are getting from Gobert most of the time is good decision-making on defense, good decision-making on offense. Occasionally, his awkwardness will betray him, especially on offense.
For sure.
But he's a communicator. He sets the tone. And the problems he had, the confusion that the Timberwolves had in that first quarter, and some of it had to do with the fact that they, were turning the ball over 9 times, which meant they almost never were in the half court. And I think that momentum boosted the Suns and deflated the Wolves. And that was the game. I mean, let's face it, 44-22, that was the game. And so I expect a week worth of what I would imagine will be stern. I mean, you lose to a team badly 3 times in a row, and otherwise you're 10 games difference between the two teams for the rest of the season. That tells you that other teams know how to beat the Phoenix Suns, and you ought to know how to beat the Phoenix Suns. You have the ability to both adjust with all your single on-ball guys. If you want to play a smaller, scrappier lineup, or just a different way of playing your bigs that emphasize that scrappiness, or you want to on offense just be more basic and impose your will in a fundamental way. Phoenix is not a good defensive team, has not been a good defensive team, and they have set up a defense that has really yet to be tested in a way that makes sense, Anyway.
No, absolutely. And I think we get into that as we start talking about the last thing on Rudy that I just want to note in relation to all this is it'll be interesting to see if Phoenix goes super small against him at any
Durant
point.
At the 5, right?
Yeah, and I mentioned this to Jace yesterday. I didn't realize it in live time. I thought they didn't go to that at all in the game on Sunday, but they did go. They brought in Royce O'Neal and shifted KD to the 5 for the last 41 seconds of the second quarter. It was like the one point of the game where it got tight. I think the Wolves got it to like 11 or something like that. I think they think that is a big weapon in this series that I wonder if they were even withholding often in the regular season matchups. And if what we're saying is true about Gobert, that might not be the weapon that they think it is. I'm inclined to believe it's not going to be some sort of game breaker, but again, we'll see. Grab our first break here. We'll move over to Ant. Today's show is brought to you by Supreme Lending, and the Dream Team at Supreme Lending serves Minnesota communities by helping you understand the true value of a home. Supreme Lending is a national top 25 mortgage lender whose vision is to help enrich the lives of their customers. Like we know is true in basketball. It's important to feel comfortable at home. It has its set of advantages. So what we want you to do if you're in that process or at that time in your life, considering purchasing a home, is to check out Supreme Lending by going to twolvesmortgages.com. They created that URL for us because obviously this is T-Wolves specific, or you can go to the QR code on the screen. And when you contact them, if you mention T-Wolves special, you will receive a $500 credit towards an appraisal. You can see what Supreme Lending has to offer here on the screen, up to $18,000 in down payment or closing cost assistance. They can also help you with an 8-day close. The Supreme Lending team has the ability to close a loan for you in as little as 8 days. Supreme Lending also has a $25,000 close on time guarantee, a closing guarantee to assure that you will get your deal done on time. So if you're ready to get started, scan the QR code on the screen or give Supreme Lending a call at the number on the screen. That's 612-431-2299. Or again, head over to twolvesmortgages.com. Mention T-Wolves special to receive $500 toward an appraisal. Britt, also, I was looking up on Prize Picks. Today's show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. They have the point totals up for the Wolves, and they are, just because I look at this decently often, they are different. They are different totals than they normally are. I mean, there's a bunch up here on the screen, but they got Cat's number low, 17.5 points in this matchup. During the regular season, that would have been about 5-6 points higher. McDaniels is low, 9.5. I guess just to rip through the points ones on them. They have Ant at more or less than 25.5 points in game one. McDaniels more or less than 9.5. Cat more or less than 17.5. Mike Conley more or less than 12.5. I also noticed Mike Conley more or less than 2.5 rebounds. You've been noting how Mike's been getting on the glass a bunch recently. Naz Reid more or less than 11.5 points. Nickeil Alexander-Walker more or less than 6.5 points. And Rudy Gobert more or less than 13.5 points. So, you've been watching this team all year. You've watched this team as listeners, play this Phoenix team a bunch of times this season. And you can take a look at Prize Picks. It's a fun way to have a little bit extra on this game in daily fantasy. Again, that's prizepicks.com or the Prize Picks app. You can use promo code Dane for a $100 sign-up bonus.
Conley and Na are going to score more than 18 points combined.
Yeah, the Nas 6.5 points number was low. I think that's kind of like baking in, right? The role player plays less. I think we could make the argument that role player in particular should be playing more right. in this series. And then, Conley, particularly if they're guarding Ant that way, he's kind of got to be I don't know.
Also, Mike Conley, have you noticed a tick up in his intensity the last 3 or 4 games? He is really he's a different beast. He's a different beast right now. And the idea, if he gets less than 12,
trouble, yeah.
Well, I mean, either that or he's really finding people. I think that I'm pretty confident that both Conley and Na will exceed those projections. Whether or not I'm not a betting person, but boy, I'll tell you, the idea that Na will get 6 or less, or that Conley will get a dozen or less, seems odd to me.
Right, and then maybe the other side of that is Ant's all the way up at 25.5. If Phoenix keeps guarding them that way, maybe it adjusts. But those are always fun. It's just for that type of conversation of what you think.
What is Gobert points wise, by the way?
13.5 points for Gobert, 12.5 rebounds is the number.
12.5 rebounds. I wouldn't.
You wouldn't touch that?
I would actually take the over on that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, Yeah, like I was saying before, I don't know. I guess this could age poorly. I'm not too worried about Rudy or getting played off or anything like that in this series. But let's move over to Ant.
Yeah.
What you wrote at the beginning of the season as a key question was, will Ant's next leap include upgrading some of the subtle but damaging flaws in his game? And you sort of reflected on that in your column for today. This one feels super relevant for the Suns series too. The way the Suns are guarding Ant with that sort of what I've been calling the triangle of ball pressure, double gap help on the right and left side.
Yeah.
It is designed to tap into those
His
subtle but
frustration.
damaging flaws, right?
Right.
So I guess my question to you is first, we should probably note that he took steps in some of those areas and also just obviously raised his sort of superstardom impact at a high level. What did you feel about Ant's ability to upgrade on some of those things during the regular season? And what do you think that proposition looks like for this playoff series?
I find it interesting that there seems to be a tipping point when Ant and Cat are on the floor that both of them get stupider, which seems very odd to me. But when Cat was not on the floor, and first of all, let me say, this isn't necessarily Cat's fault, but when Cat is on the floor, Ant becomes more ISO conscious. And to the extent that that's Cat's fault, the people who replace him in the lineup, mostly Nas and Slow-Mo, have an innate idea that they need to move to get open. And so they are moving, whereas Cat is not a mover a lot off the ball. So Ant, I think, tries to hit the open man. But I also think that when both of them play together, and it happened against Phoenix, they weirdly decide that 1-on-3 driving into traffic is the way to go. It was the worst stretch of the Timberwolves season. It happened in two bursts at different times during the course of the season, where both of them seemed to just get enmeshed in ISO, hero ball, whatever you want to call it. Ant arrived out of that and was doing very well and was getting all kinds of praise for it from Finch, who wants to stoke that, and then reverted in the Phoenix game, especially in the first disastrous first quarter. So that was a thing that's a flaw that he has. It's kind of been a pockmarked thing he has made. When he makes progress on that, it's great. And when he doesn't, it's very obvious. The other thing is on-ball sustaining, because he feels sufficiently challenged by the matchup, and off-ball awareness, in which he needs to understand that not everything is on the chalkboard as the way it happens on the floor, and somebody may decide to deke and go behind, or somebody may decide to cut weak side, or somebody may decide to just pull up rather than drive. And all of those things, and he certainly was not alone in this, but he was prominent in those barrages of points that the Suns would get, of being less than dedicated to being alert to what the nuance of the offense was doing. Yeah. And again, margin of error with the Suns is crucial. I mean, the difference between a contested shot and an uncontested shot remains significant. The Suns close that gap a little because their shooters are so good, but there is still a gap there. And we know that Ant can play great defense when sufficiently challenged. We also know that Kevin Durant is much larger than he is, just size-wise. The first shot of the game, Ant couldn't have played it better, and Durant buried a corner mid-range, which is his classic shot, moving left and hitting that little shot. I mean, how often have you seen that? So, yes, if you look over the course of the season, Ant did a lot to address some of the flaws I was talking about at the beginning of the season. One of them in particular, he got to the line a lot more, which was a priority of Finch's before the season started. I would like to see him stop getting into rows with the ref. Everybody gets calls missed on them. People react in different ways. Some, like Doncic, are just constantly in people's faces. Some, like there's a lot of players that just let it go. Ant is more toward the Doncic end, and it almost always affects his play in a negative way when he is getting involved with the refs. So, bottom line, if Ant makes the right play and Ant doesn't try to drive into three people, and other people around him are moving and reminding him that people are open and able to get the ball to him. And finally, the one thing he did not improve this season was his three-point shooting percentage, and that's because he fell off in the last month or two. I don't know.
0 for 23 stretch or whatever it was.
And I don't know if that was fatigue or just a bad stretch or whatever. But one of the things I'm going to be writing about in my playoff preview on Friday is three-point shooting. The Wolves have to remember that they're a pretty good three-point shooting team.
Oh, yeah.
And that is the way to beat that triangle gap thing, whatever you want to call it. I mean, Mike Conley, Ant, Cat.
Well, I think that's where it starts. But so the two things I wrote down there in relation to Ant with what you were just saying, the offensive congestion and the Ant's defensive awareness on and off ball. To the offensive congestion point and the gap help problem, that is solved by three-point shooting. I think particularly Cat. I mean, the way I'm setting it up as much as possible is Cat is always one pass away. He's always on Ant's right or left, immediately there. That just inherently makes the gap help of that player who's guarding Cat a more difficult. Yeah, probably go away.
Opens the gap like Moses in the sea.
Exactly. And if they want to stay in there, then then you swing it to Cat and he's got to shoot it right away.
Career 40% shooter wide open.
Yeah. So I think there's just some answers in positioning there to open things up for Ant. But Cat has to not only be on the perimeter, but spaced on the perimeter to a point where there is that gap. Like now we're talking about their gap, their ability to mine the gap and get back to them without Cat. Super intentional about that. You know that with a bullet is going to be hammered in practice this week. And if he doesn't do it, or if they aren't able to do that together, they just messed it up.
He's going to find himself on the bench.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just
because that's the value he clearly provides in this series, which is a huge value. Like, I do not want to diminish that. It is a huge value because it solves in many ways the gap help problem, and it's a terrific weapon in and of itself. So that's
and if he's hitting it, he can pull up and drive, and they're weak in the interior.
Yep. It starts with shooting it first.
Yep.
Going to be not a good sign if the first one he pumps. The first one's got to go, and you go from there. The defensive part with Ant is easier, or is, I don't know. The offensive side for Ant it's kind of contingent on his teammates, right? The defensive side is tough for him. It's the Durant matchup. If we go off of, how they guarded him.
I don't think that matchup should continue.
Yeah. And so that's certainly an argument. And I kind of feel that way too, but even just to the off ball point of that, right? All right. I'm guarding Kevin Durant. Sometimes in cross matches, or what they did, I didn't notice this live, but when I was rewatching it the other day, when Nas came in the first quarter for Cat, they put Nas on KD. I don't think that was necessarily because they thought that was a better matchup, but you're like 9 minutes into the first quarter. It was kind of like giving Ant a break. I don't know if it was they wanted Nas on him or they wanted to give Ant a break. Either way, Ant moves over to Royce O'Neal, who's checked into the game. And Ant takes it as more than a break and as a possession off. KD and Nurkic run a little interchange thing. I tweeted this clip out. You can find it on my feed. Nikhil has to come over to help, and Ant is not there to rotate over to Nikhil's guy, who's Grayson Allen in the corner. It's just not there, and Ant has been situationally a terrific on-ball defender, but that play, that right there happened all the time during the regular season where he lost attentiveness defensively, and that's going to be extremely costly. That play is the perfect example. Grayson Allen's going to make over 50% of his catch and shoot corner threes.
He leads the NBA in 3-point shooting percentage.
So it's like, I know that doesn't look like Kevin Durant to you in your head, and that's not as scary, but an open Grayson Allen corner three is a more dangerous weapon than almost pretty much like any Kevin Durant, like isolation, mid-range shot, that sort of thing. There's just a lot of responsibility on Ant in this matchup, not just on the ball, but off ball as well. And I think, to me, this is part of the reason why the KD matchup doesn't make sense, is huge offensive burden, right? Just being the guy, right? From a physically taxing standpoint. He hasn't done a great job on KD as is, just in that one-on-one matchup. Maybe just
he can't
size-wise. So it's just like, I don't know. That's not how I would move to that. Now, the unfortunate thing is, you go, okay, Dane, well, what if it's not Ant, then who is it? And you can talk about McDaniels, and then maybe Ant has to guard Booker. Okay, that isn't giving.
I would say Grayson Allen.
Yeah, and then you're putting Cat on KD.
Exactly.
So I think that's a.
I will tell you that I watched the game. I didn't see the second half twice. Second and third time, but I did see the first half 3 times. Cat did okay on KD.
Yeah.
It's easy to blame Cat. Where Cat gets screwed is when they're setting up in the half court and everything is locked in yet. And for some reason, Cat always seems perpetually kind of figuring out where he belongs.
He looked a beat behind at those times in the game. I will note, though, because I went back and watched the first Phoenix game, he was not a beat behind defensively, back in November and December. He wasn't, and I know a lot, like, it's easy to forget that. It's easy to forget how well Cat played in November and December. And is it fair to assume that he can even do that again now that he's missed, 5 weeks or whatever and only been back for 2 games? But Cat, this is the best Cat's ever been at that stuff in his career. Granted, part of it is because he was really bad at it his first 6-7 years in the league. But Cat was in tune with that and aware with that earlier in the season. And that's going to at least be, that's going to be on his mind going into this series. We'll see if he can execute it. But yeah, a ton of this has to do with what can Cat do defensively.
And also, how often does Durant pull up and drive? It just doesn't happen very often. The older he gets, the more he's a shooter, and that fits Cat because Cat has a pretty good wide base and he's tall. He can present a pretty good square of resistance if somebody is going to shoot. And
now if Durant makes like 4 or 5 of those in a row, like, he's going to kind of give him the shot just with a light contest. But Cat does kind of play back.
He's got size.
Like, come to me. Yeah.
And I would also argue that I wouldn't necessarily give up on the idea if Durant hits 4 or 5, because Durant will hit 4 or 5 on anybody, at certain times. He hit 4 or 5 on Aaron Gordon in this, second round series last year.
That's true.
But what that also does is that arranges the other matchups. Ant needs to take Grayson Allen seriously. And if he does, Ant can shut off Grayson Allen. And if you shut off Grayson Allen, it is a big deal for Phoenix's offense right now. Because Grayson Allen
can shut off Grayson Allen from a chasing him around screens standpoint. He can shut him down in 1-on-1. I agree with that, but I've never seen Ant shut anyone off as an off-ball screen navigator ever.
Well, I think that he can, and I think
why do you think that?
Because
you talk to me all the time when we're watching games about him getting caught on pin down screens.
Because I think it's the playoffs, and
okay,
I think
that's fair. I kind of think he will do more there too, but we shouldn't. Ant has not done that in
all right. Well, I mean,
often.
Maybe I should amend it. Maybe what I should say is he can be involved in good switching.
Yes, agree with that. Yeah,
You know, I mean, and
ball
most of
screen switches.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
pin downs where he gets really
exactly. Yeah,
behind.
pin downs are going to be. He doesn't. The only time he's really good on pin downs is when he's hell bent the leather and is going through the screen, going under the screen. You know, going to the ball guy he's on. So, but I do think.
For the record, Ant has talked about this on the record about being something he's bad at. Like,
yes.
I'm not saying that to you. I'm saying that to listeners.
Right.
So I'm not making that up.
Yeah, no. And look, whenever we say bad things about Ant, because first of all, they are bad things and we watch the games. So we're going to speak our minds and tell the truth. I acknowledge that there are a lot of amazing things he does. If he happens to find himself locked up with somebody because of switching or whatever, and the shot clock is going down or whatever, he is a fantastic on-ball defender.
Mm-hmm. And
he also is got a good nose for lane filling, for steals, for all that stuff.
Totally.
It's kind of like you hit the snooze button on your alarm, and you just want that 10 minutes of extra sleep, and you're not asleep, but you have like 5 minutes where you're waiting for that button to go off, but you're not awake.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what Anna's like when his man is not engaged in the play yet, and he doesn't see how the offensive flow is coming toward him in a manner that he has to respond to.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And also let's see just what it looks like when he levels up for it in the playoffs. I bet you get more of those isolation stops where he looks like the best one-on-one defender in the league. I think,
and you have those ball screen switches where he can take, a Royce O'Neal or even a Nurkic.
Yeah, blitz it and rip it away. Yeah, totally.
We've seen let Nurkic roll on Ant and see if they can get a pass to Nurkic.
All right, we'll grab another break and come back with Britt to talk about the Finch and Conley points that he wrote about. All right, Britt, your third question that you had entering the season, that I think, again, remains relevant here in this series was, can Chris Finch wring optimal value out of a suddenly overcrowded front court? That's something he did with flying colors this season. That's not just the Cat and Gobert thing that worked. Obviously that pairing had good numbers. Really important thing with that pairing is they didn't get burned in transition this season. They really answered a lot of the glaring Cat and Gobert questions. Also figured out how to, effectively incorporate Naz Reid and, empower him to be a big, but also really a wing more than anything to make it work. And then Kyle Anderson too, who is a big, important part of this team and also a big. He's a 4. We thought that going into the season. We know that now. That's something to navigate in this series now too. But when you do have all your bigs back, like Finch is going to have to find a restraint to not play Kyle at the 3, and or find the right personnel to make that work, which we've seen very little of this season. But Finch has done a good job navigating that task this season between his 5s and 4s that he played and the way that he meshed them all up. But it gets tricky in this series when this is a style of team that pushes you probably as hard as anyone to not play 2 bigs at one time. And that's what, Finch is going to need to, wrestle with his words of, we're going to stay big. We don't want to adjust to others. We want to make them adjust to us. Well, that's going to be tough in this series. Not impossible, but it just goes to, can he coach it up? Can he get them to execute it as he did during the regular season?
I think, when you think about the Clippers and the Suns, okay?
Yeah, I like
both
this.
of them.
This conversation.
Both have incredible star power. and both have shooters and passers that you would imagine could give the Wolves fits. Why did the Wolves do so much better against the Clippers than they did against the Suns? And a lot of it for me, well, there were two things. One is ball movement on offense. The Suns' ball movement has been phenomenal. And the Clippers did do some ball movement, but their natural tendency is to let Harden or Paul George or Kawhi basically dribble around and then cook as they see fit. That plays right into the Wolves' hands. Mm-hmm. The Suns very rarely had one of their great shooters hold the ball for any longer than 2 seconds. That ball is moving, and when it's caught, they are getting it up. And if it is in their hands for more than 2 seconds, it's because they're waiting to negotiate a screen and then pull up quickly or something like that. It is purposeful. It's not, let's see how the defense is reacting. You know, if you want to look at it from the other lens,
that's great. That's a really good way.
Cat and Ant look at things, you know. So ball movement is crucial. Then the question becomes, if you're playing bigs, what do you need from bigs to counteract that ball movement? You need a really high IQ on the court. You need to be able to know what the offense is doing to you. That is check one on Rudy Gobert, check one on Kyle Anderson, slow-mo. Both of those guys understand what a half-court defense is trying to do when they're slicing you up. Both are aggressive. Both have really long arms. Both of them, I would say, would deserve minutes in that realm, provided that Kyle, as you mentioned, I mean, he's better at the 4. And he could also be, I think it could work with Cat at the 5 if there's Eubanks or Nurkic, and slow-mo at the 4. You know,
that worked well on Sunday. It was Eubanks and Durant out there, and they wanted to put Eubanks on Anderson and Durant on Cat because they don't want Eubanks on Cat, right? And so actually Kyle made a couple buckets on Eubanks there. Like there's a way to make that work.
And on defense, which I think is more important to some extent, I think that slow-mo again has that capability. He's an exceptionally smart, deliberate defender. And the only thing I worry about is whether or not by the time the ball movement gets to him, the play will already be hopeless. The Wolves will be hopelessly behind on their rotations. Is the only thing I worry about. Nas, for some reason, had a bad game at both ends. I didn't go back and look at the first 2 Phoenix games.
He had some nice contests on Booker in the first half there. Like he's athletic and quick. But yeah, I mean, be lying if we said Nas had a good game on Sunday. Yeah.
So, I mean, again, that seems to be something where I don't think Nas has a low court IQ, but I also think that he's been playing so many different roles in so many different ways that he doesn't really have had enough reps in a specific way to really settle into what he needs to do, which to me is be a combo forward defender.
Yeah.
You know, and so there's a lot of combo forwards on this team, but the question then becomes, is he tall enough for Durant? Is he quick enough for,
Booker,
Grayson Allen and Booker, but it is going to be important for Finch to figure out not only the front court alignments, it's an overcrowded front court, but there are also a plethora of options in terms of defensive guys he can use against what the Suns are doing. I mean, Monte Morris, I'd be curious to see what Monte Morris could do on Allen. You know, that seems like a guy who Allen would struggle with. And, Monte Morris would know exactly why he was in the game guarding Allen. And so
could be in the Beal one too, because Conley was guarding Beal.
And Beal,
Morris was surprisingly stout, I think, is what we're getting at defensively.
He's the best screen negotiator on the team in terms of blowing stuff up, except for maybe Nah.
Yeah, I was gonna say Nikhil's the best.
Yeah.
Monte really surprised us in his defense.
He's physical. He's physical on screens, and that's good. And so
he also did not play in the game on Sunday, and so I think we're anticipating it would be kind of weird if a guy that didn't play on Sunday gets put into the rotation.
But it would not be certainly not unprecedented.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, he could be in the rotation for any number of reasons. And J-Mac, unfortunately on defense is contingent upon other people being smart too, because J-Mac needs. If he goes to do something that makes sense, he needs to assume that somebody will react to what he's doing in a manner that makes sense. And if they don't, he's screwed, or the team is screwed. So much of this is going to be what Phoenix presents as a challenge are really good shooters who have learned that if you move the ball really well and do a lot of screening and a lot of cutting off those screens, and a lot of positioning himself in the corner, all your basic high pick and roll actions. But if you do them with crispness and you get your best shooters open, even for a little bit, that works.
Yeah, I think that's me and Jace talked a little bit about the Clippers Suns thing yesterday, but I like the way you put it in. The Suns get to mid ranges off their actions, where the Clippers get to their mid ranges out of isolation. A little bit more. Maybe it's off of a switch.
They're crab dribbles, or they're basically surveying, and then they do a lot of everybody on that team. Paul George, Harden, Kawhi. They do that. Look like they're going to drive, and then a little pull up.
Yep. Well, and that's just like in a vacuum a harder shot than just like coming off of Nurkic's shoulder, coming right in to the mid-range shot. So that's part of the reason.
I will tell you, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and this year Allen are all better shooters than any of those three people on the Clippers.
So that's what I was going to get to, is they're taking better mid-range shots, and those Suns players are more voluminous and more accurate mid-range shooters this season, and largely in previous seasons. I was looking it up because I was just looking at mid-range stuff, right? 9 players in the I said this yesterday, but I'll say it to you because I think it's interesting. 9 players in the NBA shot more than 20% of their shots from the long mid-range this season. 2 of them are on the Suns, Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. Beal was up there at 16% as well. KD and Booker were also 2 of the best long mid-range accuracy players in the league. Booker made 47% of his. Durant made 52. Get this. Only 2 players in the league made over 50% of their long mid-range shots, and took over 200 of them. Joel Embiid made 51% on 232. Durant made 52% of his long mid-range shots, the long ones, on 383 attempts. I mean, it is a completely different level of mid-range threat. So we really need to reconstruct our mind of what we think about that being a good shot to allow, as we've really gotten to, also within the playoff context. And what's interesting about that is those numbers are all so much higher than what Paul George shot, what Kawhi Leonard shot from there, and what James Harden shot from there. And none of Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, or James Harden shot over 20% of their shots from long mid-range. They were not as high of volume players there too. So I think it's a really good, interesting question of why do the Wolves have so much success against the Clippers and fail so much against the Suns this season? I think that's what it is, man. I think it's getting better mid-range shots off of actions, to your point, and the fact that those 3 are just better at it. I mean, that's why the Wolves need to play more aggressively and need to, like Rudy did when they played the Clippers, really be up there, really get in that. We're not just getting a hand in your face. We're trying to take that away as much as possible. But I think that's a big distinction to be made there.
Agreed.
Let's do the Conley point. Wrap up
Sure.
On that. Your question was, can the Wolves reasonably rely on a full season of health from grizzled point guard Mike Conley? As we were saying earlier, we're anticipating him being like kind of needing him to be like a 15 a game sort of guy. And to reflect on the season, he did that. He played, as you wrote here, played in 76 of the 82 games and logged 2,193 minutes. This was nice. The most since he left Memphis after the 2018-19 season. Not only had a good season, signed a cheapy extension, had a great shooting season in particular. He did turn up his minutes. He did turn up his aggression in the playoffs last year. They need that from him again here in this series, right?
And he can talk to Anthony Edwards.
Yeah.
I mean, when Anthony Edwards is losing his mind, Conley finds it for him.
That's well put. Yeah, and that's going to be important in the, like, there's this dynamic that's going to present itself at times in this series of Ant needing to find the right level of aggression against loaded up defenses.
Yep.
Ant's big adjustment or growth this season has been recognizing doubles and getting off of it. The next level to that is not always letting a double or loaded up defense impact you and take you out of the play. It's where the players who are, a step above Ant or just a step more experienced, like the Lucas, when they see that coverage, being able to actually, Paul George is really good at when they throw him a lot of attention. He sees that coming, he just shoots the three right over the top of him, right? The next level for Ant is not letting that take him out of the game like it did on Sunday when he only shot 7 shots. Right. But it's a margin there, right, man? That's like dangerous too, to being overly aggressive against the loaded up defense. I think Mike Conley is the coach on the floor, really helping him through that over the course of the series. Because we know this team doesn't go anywhere if Ant shoots 7 shots a game, right? Like there has to be more to that. And there's the other answers that we talked about: Cat, spacing the floor, 3-point shooting, all those things should loosen up the defense some, but Ant's got to be able to discern that effectively in the series, and Conley should help.
And one of the things that I think that I will probably put this, one of the things I thought about when I was thinking about the column I'm going to write for Friday, the Wolves have never been favored in a playoff series in how long?
Yeah. I mean, well, since 2004.
Yeah. So there isn't anybody on this team.
Well, they're not favored in this series.
Well,
right now. I mean, Vegas was.
Yeah. But they
50-50.
They have something to lose. I mean, they have something to lose that is not like, oh, we played Denver better than anybody. They can't say that this year. What they have to say is, we beat the team we were supposed to beat, and now we're playing in the second round as we should. They are supposed to beat Phoenix. That's the bottom line is they won 56 games. Phoenix won 7 fewer, and there would have been 10 fewer if they hadn't played each other. I get the weirdness of the matchups. I also get that if you have an elite defense and you have a dog in the playoffs who has made his original reputation as a guy who elevates, he is the man, then you ride those two things. You ride a Rudy Gobert-led defense, and you ride an Anthony Edwards-led offense. And yeah, there are challenges on both ends of those courts, but that's what adjustments are for. And it is up to Rudy to run the show at one end of the court, and it is up to Ant to run the show at the other end of the court. And that is where Mike Conley can be his aide de camp. He can be his guy that basically says, all right, in this instance now, and Finch too, you call a high screen and roll for Rudy and Ant out of a timeout, or you call a weak side skip pass to Cat when the wall is over on Rudy, whatever. But you start to dissect what Phoenix does in terms of the way they're playing, and you do it in a manner that gives Ant a little more room to operate.
Yeah, and I think too, like the dissection point and breaking it down, what Phoenix has been wont to do over the course of the season is when anything breaks down for even a small extended stretch of time, it often breaks down for a quarter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's why everyone will cite the Suns' fourth quarter woes that they had this season. Well, that's because when it stopped working, it really devolved. And that's why, as you know, I mean, you go back and watch the tape and what they've done defensively against this Wolves team, particularly the last two games, you're like, damn, you know, like that's tough for the Wolves to score. But if you get a couple of those adjustments, you get a couple more of those answers, you play a little bit smarter collectively, and you break it a little bit, you do have that 12-2 run or something like that. We don't know that Phoenix has that ability to like wall back up and be like, we're cool. Because was not their behavioral pattern largely throughout the season. And yeah, that's why if you're Conley and working in conjunction with Ant, like, I mean, that's the big part of the turnovers, right? Just not having those turnovers so as to give your team a chance to score consistently on 4 or 5 possessions in a row. That, you know, that's going to make a difference. You can't do that if you turn the ball over. So I don't know if that means more Conley on the ball for a little bit more control. So, because a lot of Ant's turnovers come from driving from the top of the key, right? Like, these are the things that I don't know. Me and you, we're not smart enough to know, but we are smart enough to know that there are adjustments to be made out there that, if they execute, will impact what Phoenix did so well against the Wolves and give the Wolves a chance to make a run. It's a young team, but Mike Conley is a good example of why this team isn't a low IQ team, you know, and you know, and Rudy is too, more of the older, more mature players on the team. Kyle Anderson, right? Like, those guys need to play mature games so as to kind of buoy the overall maturity of a young team. Yeah, Ant's been in the playoffs a good amount. Jaden hasn't been in it since his second season when he was really burgeoning, like new in that Memphis series. Obviously, he didn't play.
And he played really well.
Yeah, and then Nas, you know, Nas didn't play in the Denver series last year either with the broken wrist and barely played against Memphis. So, you know, this is gonna be new to a lot of the young guys. The old guys got to kind of hold that up, stabilize it, and then empower the younger guys to go.
And I will continue my Jaden McDaniels criticism tour, which has been going on for some weeks now. We haven't mentioned his name until now. Yeah. And we're playing the Phoenix Suns. He has done a great job on Booker, as has Na. Both of them have done a really good job on Booker. But Jaden McDaniels has not done a good job on switching. He's getting beaten occasionally off the dribble. He's getting he has not been the reliably lockdown defender he was in previous seasons. All season, he's been much more sporadic at that. And his
for good and for poor or bad.
Oh, yeah, no. When his highs are high, they are very good.
Two Phoenix games ago against Booker did a really good job.
Fantastic. And he's done a good job against Booker, you know, in this series too, in many ways.
Yeah. Sure.
I mean, in the last game. But on offense, it's awful how he can't be relied on, and how his decision making in that first quarter, his turnovers were you know, terrible, and he's got to snap out of it. Or again, you know, like he and Cat, I feel like he and Cat are on thin ice. And I know that the idea of sitting Jaden is ridiculous when you have all the shooters that they have. But I do think that he needs to be a better team defender, and he needs to be able to hit a shot. And if that doesn't happen, then I begin to filter in slow-mo, and I begin to filter in Nas. If they want to go small, especially, you know, if you want to have Durant at the 5, I've got a 5-person counter to that doesn't have Cat or Rudy on the floor. Put slow-mo on Durant and put Nah and McDaniels and and J-Mac or whoever, Conley. I mean, this team can play that way and also bring in Rudy and do that as a counter. They have a number of ways they can go with that, different looks. And so, but what that means is that Jaden McDaniels, I want him to play to 90% of his potential rather than 30% of his potential. And if that happens, then that's a big X factor that we haven't mentioned because we can't expect it.
Yeah. No, and it's, I mean, one easy way Jaden can get more is him being a cutter. That gets him shots. There's going to be times where he's left and he's going to need to make some corner threes too. But if it just does happen to be a 1 of 5 3-point shooting game or whatever, can you give something else as a cutter in this? Can he be part of not only the ball movement but the body movement in this as well? But yeah, no, you're right. We've brushed over him too much, and you're right for the reason, because we don't know what exactly to expect out of him. But there is a range,
Absolutely.
And I think we're leaning, given what we saw on Sunday or maybe more recently from McDaniels, we're leading towards the lower side of the gradient. But the upper side exists, particularly just because they need him defensively in this. If he can take care of his defensively with some reasonable certainty and be somewhat of a weapon offensively, being able to attack in isolation late in the shot clock. Can he make a couple threes and then be there for a cutter, particularly on the Cat post-ups? I think
finish and want to finish. What I've seen lately from him is kind of a worry that his shot will get blocked, or maybe he's just the team seems lately to be not decisive enough about whether or not they want to be a ball moving team or a team that decisively finishes a play. It seems like the transition to being move the ball mantra. There is a time where the next pass isn't a noticeable improvement.
Yeah.
It may be a very slight improvement, but if you have a shot, I'd like to see the Wolves finish off a 3-pass sequence with a nice shot rather than looking around for another pass, because that occasionally is when they turn it over.
Mm-hmm. And back to what we were talking about here, I think Conley's awareness of these things, positioning players in the right spot, really kind of Chris Paul in it, nope, exactly. You're here, you're that. Like they do need some of that, because Mike does have that awareness. And we'll likely have it in a playoff setting where some guys, younger guys, newer guys, are going to be, your head's going to be spinning a little bit there too. So
I'll make a prediction right now. I said one point in time in game 1, and if it doesn't happen in game 1, it'll happen in game 2, but I think it'll happen in game 1. Mike Conley surprises the hell out of everybody and drives and hits a wide open floater, because nobody thinks about Mike Conley and floaters until he does it, and everybody goes, "Oh yeah." Mm-hmm. That's why we need to watch Mike Conley on the floater. And
huge X factor in this series, man. Too, particularly with what he's developed, like as playing more of like a 2-guard pin down guy when Ant's on the ball or another point guard's on the ball. Like I think that's going to surprise some people watching the Wolves too. Of like, oh wait, Conley plays like Grayson Allen sometimes. Like he does. And there's a lot of ways in which Mike Conley can impact this game, this series. Offensively, he does have a hell of a task. Defensively, if they match up like they did before,
Bradley Beal is no fun.
No, he was good. He was good in that game.
He wore Conley out a little bit.
Mm-hmm. He's been the most volatile Suns player all season too. So to some of the
but he's been hot lately, and man, he was on fire in that game.
Well, you gotta run to the airport. I gotta run to practice. We didn't get into the play-in, but that's all right.
I can just say that my two predictions were wrong. I mean, I didn't predict anybody. Fortunately, I kept my mouth shut until now. But I thought the Pelicans and the Warriors would win. And hats off to the Kings, man.
Yeah.
What a great game. Keegan Murray, man.
Keon Ellis, baby.
Also, yeah, and Ellis. But Ellis has been kind of like a Mike Brown genius move, ever since they needed a new starter. He's been fabulous. Yeah. And so I kind of expected him to do his, middle thing, his glue kind of thing. But Keegan Murray getting like close to 30 points, and especially that first quarter. And then, Sabonis and Fox are grinders in their own very distinct ways. Yeah. And the Warriors, what they looked like they were ready for it. They looked like, hey, I don't think we want to play a whole series. I think we're done.
And they are. They're done. The Lakers.
And then you got Zion. The mystery of Zion, the bionic man who always needs a part.
Yeah. Oh man, 3 minutes to go. 40 points, and he
throws the towel down. You knew nothing was wrong with his shoulder.
That's true. All right. Check out Britt's column. Talking about what we talked about here, but a little bit more focus in the column on looking back at the season and what all those guys.
I'm a pro savoring good things.
Yeah. I felt like I was reading it. I'm like, is this you like you're a little nervous about like you're going to leave the season with a bad taste in your mouth. So you wanted to get a good taste out there. I'm not at that point yet. I'm not at that point.
And on Friday, I think you'll see, I'll say it now. I think the Wolves will win the first round.
Yeah. I'm still holding off on going prediction on it myself, but I think it's, I kind of agree with the odds right now. I think it's fair to say 50-50 and, we'll kind of see going from there. But yeah, look for that column too. That's coming out on Friday from Brett. I'm sure we'll talk about that more at Following Knife. We're looking forward to seeing y'all out there. And
yeah, I am too. I like the questions. Come and ask some provocative questions.
Yeah. We'll have done a handful of pods sort of, previewing. It'll be good. I think that'll be the majority of the show. Is letting people, it always is, ask questions, and me, Kyle, and Brett will kind of respond to those. So again, that's Following Knife this Friday. Come at 6 p.m. for happy hour, get a seat, maybe wear a jacket because there is sound outside too, but there'll be more overflow seating out there. I think it'll be a pretty full event too. So that's Following Knife on Friday night, and then check out Britt's column that day as well. Next up will be myself and Chris Hine will record a pod tomorrow morning. He has a big Nas Reed feature story that comes out. So we spent some time digging into this matchup a little bit. Well, I guess we'll kind of do a little bit more of a retrospective with Chris as well, looking back at Nas's season and digging into Nas. And also, I've kind of intentionally not talked about Nas in this series too much. We'll get into that a little bit too. So that's coming up with Chris on, what is that? What's tomorrow? It's tomorrow, Thursday, on Thursday morning. Until then, he's Britt Robson. You can follow him on Twitter at Britt Robson. Read him on MinPost. I'm Dane at DaneMooreNBA. Yep. Until Thursday with Chris. He's Britt. I'm Dane. Peace out. How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.